Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out today to Flyleaf Books. For your local independent bookstore, and we really appreciate you coming out and buying books. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing from four superb authors discussing what it's like to write queer YA in the South, along with Allie Hendricks. Kelsey Day, I'm just going to go sort of at random, but I'll try to point at them as we go. Yeah, that's good. Kelsey Day is a young adult author and queer Appalachian poet. Their writing has appeared in The Atlantic, Orion Magazine, Freeman's, and more. This is their first novel for young readers. Olivia Neal. Yeah. Writer, artist, storyteller from Greensboro, North Carolina. She has published work across genres, including fiction, poetry, essays, reviews, and zines. Nita Tyndall is a queer author and literary translator from North Carolina. Their YA novels from Harper Teen received critical acclaim, and their debut, Who I Was With Her, won the Bisexual Book Award in 2021. Nicole Zelniker is the author of several books and the founder and editor-in-chief of the literary magazine Me Brace Press. And then finally, Allie Hendricks is a bookstagrammer who focuses on BIPOC, queer, and disabled voices in literature. She is a writer for Readin' Magazine, a gamer, and a cat mom. So thank you to all of you for being here today and all of you for attending. We have these authors' books up front. If you haven't gotten one yet, you can grab one after the talk and get them signed. But over to you.
To get this one, it's on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
This one is also on.
That one is also on. Okay, cool. To get started today, I think we could just go down the line. We can start with Nicole and pass this way. If you just want to tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, I love going first. It's my favorite activity. So all I know so far is a YA book that came out last year in which the protagonist, Avery, comes out as bisexual and non-binary and is trying to kind of navigate those new identities while her parents have decided to get a divorce and ship her across the country to live with her estranged half-brother and his secret boyfriend. So that's the book.
Leaves the mic. So my most recent YA is Have You Seen This Girl? It came out in 2024. It is about a non-binary teen named Sid, whose father is a serial killer, and girls in their town start going missing in the same way that they did when their father was actively killing. And they have to figure out who did it, or the girl that they have a crush on might be next.
Amazing. My book is called The Spiral Key, and it came out just about a week ago now, so it's fresh and it's here. And it's about a queer friendship breakup in which the ex-best friend of the main character throws a lavish virtual reality birthday party every single year, which everyone in the school wants to go to. But the main character, being the ex-best friend, never gets an invitation until her senior year, when she is invited to this virtual reality birthday party and quickly discovers that it is not actually a reconciliation attempt, but a trap. And basically she ends up trapped in this virtual reality hellscape that's controlled by her queer ex-best friend.
Awesome. Yeah, my book is called Blue Ridge Calling. It came out last year in September. It is about two teenagers, Cora and Sage, who are lifelong best friends. And Cora has just graduated from high school and is supposed to leave at the end of the summer. And Sage realizes that her brother has gone missing while searching for ghosts. They live in the Appalachian Mountains, and so they spend the summer looking for him by following his path through these different ghost stories, these different haunted locations in Western North Carolina. And it's gay.
Okay, so the one question that every YA author has to answer, why did you choose to write a YA novel?
Well, I started working on Blue Ridge Calling when I was 19. So I was pretty close in age to the characters, and I was at a really transformative time in my life, and so I think I was really captivated by YA because it often takes place in this in-between time between being a kid and being an adult. And yeah, I really liked that space of like, what do I do next? And the like uncertainty that kind of leads to the rest of your life. I worked on the book off and on for many, many years, and it's different. It's quite different now than when I first started working on it, because I'm obviously quite different. But I think that I still love YA because, yeah, it's like, even if it's not magical in the literal sense, it's magical in the emotional sense.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And also, for me, I think that what a lot of it is that when I was a teenager, I didn't feel like my experiences were taken seriously. Like there's this sensation of, you know, you're being treated a lot of the time like you're a sort of like half-made person, and that your experiences don't matter as much as the adults around you. And so it felt really important to me to bring, like, to write for young people and to treat their experiences with the seriousness that they deserve. And so it felt like a really natural fit for me.
Same, honestly. I feel like I'm just gonna echo what you guys just said. I grew up reading a lot of YA. I grew up reading like Sarah Dessen and Laurie Halse Anderson, and I always wanted to write books that really felt like that, because I think those books were so important to me as a teenager. And because when I was growing up, there was not a lot of queer YA. We had like a couple books, but not a ton of them. So I wanted to write those to kind of reflect the experiences that I had growing up queer, and growing up queer in North Carolina specifically as well.
Yeah, I think all of that, for all of the important reasons, but also I started reading a lot more YA just like a couple years ago than I ever did really even as a teen. And I think part of that is the place I am in life where I'm like ready to heal my inner child or whatever my therapist would say. But I think that that kind of got me started more on doing more YA in writing as well.
Sweet. You kind of segued naturally into my next question.
Oh, perfect.
Which is that my favorite thing about reading YA is that does speak to like your inner child. So I was wondering, is as you were writing your books, what part about writing your book was either healing or speaking to your inner child?
Am I going first? I think that actually I'm going to make you go first. I'm going to think about it.
That's fine. And someone can steal my mic too. I just.
Yeah, I think so. When I was writing, I wrote Have You Seen This Girl in 2018, and that was when I was just thinking about my own gender identity. So I had not identified as non-binary until then. So writing Sid's story was where them being non-binary is not really the point of the novel. It was still a way for me to have that experience of what would it have been like if I had known that I was non-binary when I was younger, or if I had kind of like figured that out. So I wrote that for me to kind of, I was working through a lot of my own gender feelings, and a lot of Sid's feelings about their identity in the novel were what I was feeling at the time as an adult. So that particular book was definitely for like teenage me who did not know what being non-binary was, and I think my only exposure to trans people was Degrassi. It was not a bad rap for the time period.
I think maybe a similar thing is a lot of queer people have a very specific experience of like an intense friendship with another person who ends up being queer too, and you aren't necessarily out to each other at the time, or maybe you are, but you're not like fully out. At least like in my experience, it was like I had a very intense platonic friendship with somebody who, and it wasn't actually platonic. Like it was so gay. Like it was a very gay friendship. And when the friendship like fell apart in a really big way, it felt like a romantic breakup, but I didn't understand why. I didn't understand like why it felt so intense, or like why I got so jealous like when she started dating a boy. And there were this like all of these really confusing experiences because I hadn't come to terms with my own queerness yet. And so writing The Spiral Key was very much like revisiting that particular phenomenon of like a queer, intense adolescent female friendship.
Yeah, I think that like similarly, I think that writing a like teenage queer relationship into existence, I think was important to me, but also the book is really deals with a lot of grief and trauma, and I think that it sort of is about the way that grief and trauma feel when you're young, which I think is very different from how it feels when you're an adult. And also finding humor in those things, and like the grief and the humor kind of coexisting. So I think in that respect, like, I think it oftentimes with YA, at least the YA that I read, which was quite a bit of like, high fantasy and speculative YA, like I think that oftentimes the trauma is sort of like outside of the realm of reality. And I think that, real trauma and loss happens to young people all the time. And I didn't really see that as much when I was growing up. And yeah, I think that like I feel like I had something else I was to say, but I want to give Nicole a chance.
We can circle back.
Yeah, we can always circle
I have a feeling that like a bunch of people on this panel have ADHD.
Call us out, why don't you?
Yeah. Listen. I very much agree with what you said about gender, and Kelsey. When you said, what you said about queer friendships, I noticed like a bunch of people in the audience were like, oh yeah, like we all had like a specific person in mind. But I think for me, I think I agree with a lot of those things kind of about like queerness and discovering that, and then also there are several characters in All I Know So Far who are disabled, who have various autoimmune conditions, who have chronic pain, and it was kind of the first time that I had written chronic pain in the very real ways that it affects me, and not just kind of as an aside. And I think that was very healing for me, especially just in looking at that through like a YA perspective, and that kind of care that I never really got as a teenager that I can now kind of like give myself as an adult. But yeah.
Cool. Did you remember yours?
Yeah, I was gonna say like I love a queer friend group in high school. I think that's so fun to write about, and I also feel like, yeah, so much of the book was inspired by homesickness and really like moving away and then realizing that I actually really love where I come from. And so in that way, I think like the message to me, to my younger self, and also to the audience is like, there is room for you in the South, there's room for you in Appalachia, there's room for you where you grew up if you want there to be. And it can be, you don't have to leave to make your life what you want it to be necessarily. And so yeah, in that way I think I was like writing this like alternative reality of like having this like young adulthood in the South can be really special, and it doesn't have to be something that you feel like you have to leave behind.
I can confirm that reading your book made me a little homesick for the mountains. Yeah, thank you all. Speaking of the South, because this is a panel about Southern YA fiction, how did we all grew up in the South? No. Okay, well, you can still answer anyways. How did growing up in the South, or your experiences of the South, like affect how you wrote your book?
Fundamentally, I mean, I think that, yeah, I moved to New York when I was 18 and really hated it and was very homesick. And that was kind of why I started writing the book, was really just to write about all of the things about North Carolina that I love and that I missed at the time. And so I think that it's fundamentally about growing up in the South and about Appalachian folklore and the unique, I think, like cultural experience of Appalachia. And yeah, I think that like there's something very special, I think, about the South. And I think that when I was in New York, I went to NYU, and I was surrounded. I knew one other person who was from the South in the whole time I was at NYU. Most people that I met were from other big cities or from the tri-state area. And so a lot of them like really didn't understand where I came from or much about my background, and made a lot of assumptions about it. And these were all lovely people. I worked at the LGBTQ center on campus and really loved it, and that's how I made a lot of my friends. But most of them had never been to the South. And I was there in fall of 2016, and that was like around the same time that I decided that I was gonna leave New York and come home. And a lot of my friends were really confused by that decision, because they were like, how can you go back to this place where like, you know, the majority of people voted for Trump, and like where, you know, how can you feel like you'll be safe? And it's like, well, it's my home. It's where I grew up. It's like where my family lives and my friends are. It's like, you know, and I grew up in Greensboro, so it's it's not what they were imagining. I mean, I think, you know, they referred to me a lot as being from a small town, and I was like, I'm not from a small town. Greensboro is pretty big. Yeah, so I think like I really wanted to challenge some assumptions about the South and about what it's like to be queer here and to grow up here, and kind of share my experience, which is like on the whole pretty positive.
If it's okay, if I go next, because I kind of had the opposite experience of Olivia, where I grew up in, you know this, where I grew up in New York and then came to North Carolina for undergrad, and I very much feel like my friends in New York, my friends that don't live in the South generally don't really understand what it's like, and don't really understand the community and how you can find such great and beautiful queer community here in a very unique way to the South that just doesn't exist in other places. And so part of why I wrote the main character in All I Know So Far, Avery, as having lived in California and then moving to Virginia for that year, was to kind of highlight that, like, no, there's such beautiful community and such beautiful queerness that is present in the South, and that this is like where I've chosen to live my adult life for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, I really resonated with everything you said about it just being fundamental, because I think like this book doesn't even take place in North Carolina, but I'm from the mountains of North Carolina, and it's sort of like in the way when people ask like how being a queer person affects the way that you write books, like it's just intrinsic, like it's just it's fundamental in a way that's hard to even really like categorize or be like really explicit about, because it's just like it's in everything. It's part of who I am, and so every bit of what I write in some way is channeling from that place and from that culture and from that sense of responsibility.
I am not beating the ADHD allegations. Can you read the actual
I'm not going to beat them either and try to repeat it back to you. So the question is was, how has your experience growing up in the South affected your writing?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it is just intrinsic. My first novel also took place in a fictional North Carolina town. Have You Seen This Girl takes place in a fictional Eastern North Carolina town, because my whole family is from Eastern North Carolina. Sorry, Western friends, we might fight about barbecue. My second book takes place in Germany, so that was an outlier. And for me, it was just coming back to writing Have You Seen This Girl, and coming back to setting it in North Carolina did feel like coming home in a way, because like you guys talked about, I wanted to challenge those assumptions about what people think queerness is in the South and what people think transness is in the South and what people think it's like. Because I feel like I get this question a lot in terms of living here, so well, why don't you leave? Like, because I've never left. I'm like, well, why would I? Because like you said, this is my home. This is where I live.
You.
Yeah, I wanted to show that positive experience of what it's like to live here, like kind of like the rest of you guys have already touched on.
I think something interesting too that, you know, when all of y'all have touched on like queer community and queer friendships, a common theme throughout all 4 books is that a lot of it focuses on queer friendship. Everyone in your books, all the main characters have a rocky relationship with either one or both parents, whether or not they're in jail or just not here or kick them out or whatever. Or dead. Yeah.
That's young adult.
Yeah. There's a whole variety of parentage in this group here. But what made you, I mean, besides the fact that, you know, queer friendships and queer community, was it intentional to focus on friendships and less on the relationship between parent and child? Or did that just come about naturally for y'all?
I'd love to take that because I think I also remembered what I was going to say earlier about like speaking to your inner child or how it relates to your child. And I think that, you know, Blue Ridge Calling, there is a romance in it, but the primary relationship is a friendship. And it's that friendship that sort of like is the story. And so I think that that was really important to me. I have a friend who I've known since birth, the way that Cora and Sage have known each other, and is family to me in the way that they are to each other. And I felt like that experience is so lucky and wonderful and really has shaped my life of having this like foundational friendship that I can rely on. You know, we say cradle to grave is like our thing. And just to know that I have this person in my life forever. And so that was really important to me to focus on friendship as not a background relationship, but as the formative relationship of the book and the driving relationship of the book. And, you know, to have them fight and, you know, miscommunicate and get into all sorts of scraps and still like have this fundamental connection. So yeah, I felt like, I mean, you know, not to be a shock, but like, you know, I think that everybody has kind of complicated family relationships, and I think that that was also important to me to write. And having chosen family in this way of like truly these are the people that you spend holidays and birthdays with and do family vacations with, and like that being somebody who's not your family of origin, I think that like that felt really important to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, similarly, I think there is this, like, sort of well-earned obsession with a lot of queer people around, like, the idea of, like, a queer family, like, friend family. And it also just, like, is, I feel like, oftentimes true, at least in, like, my lived experience and with, like, folks around me, that, like, oftentimes, like, there are disconnections between, like, the ways that you think about your identity and the ways that your parents want to think about your identity. And oftentimes there's like projections that that parents lovingly even want to sort of place on their kids, and there's something really freeing about getting to just be who you want to be around friends, and specifically around queer friends. And so I think, like, for me at least, like, that's just something that I come back to again and again, just this idea of, like, what does, like, queer community actually look like, and how does it persevere, like, outside of bloodlines?
This is a fun question, given the book that I wrote. There's an acknowledgement in this one to my parents that was like, I'm going to write a book someday where the characters have cool parents, and it's not this one, and I'm so sorry. But because Sid's relationship with their father does inform a lot of their perspective, but more so in, I think, their driving fear that they don't want to become like him. For Sid, I wanted to give them, because they have this budding relationship with this new girl named Mavis, I wanted to give them this experience of seeing another queer person, because when I did grow up in a very small town, and I was the only out person in my high school, and I had one queer friend who was not out. And that experience was very isolating. So I wanted to write something to kind of touch on. Sid is isolated for like a multitude of reasons within that book, because of their father, because of their queerness, because of their transness, which is never like explicitly stated that that is why they're isolated, but it kind of is. So with Mavis, who is from out of town, who does not know what their family has done, I wanted to give them this sort of like boon almost of, you're queer, I'm queer, we're going to latch onto each other, whether or not we actually have genuinely anything else in common. Because that was also my experience in high school, was latching on to like the one or two other queer people I knew, and dating them. And you know, realizing later, oh, we don't have as much in common other than our queerness as we thought, but we're the only queer people we know in this town. So we kind of have to stick together for that reason. Not in a bad way necessarily, but just that very insular, particular closeness that comes from that.
Yeah, I think all of that is very important. I definitely, what Kelsey said about also not beating the ADHD allegations. But give me like a quick summary.
Queer friend groups.
Queer friend groups. Yeah, no, I think that I'm so sorry. That like that friendship and that kind of like found family that we love to see in queer books is so aligned with how my life has been. So I think that that's very important to me. I think also that I have written and I'm querying with my agent books that are more centered on like romance. But I think for me, the way that I write and also like my experience as an aromantic person, I'm always going to kind of put those friendships at the forefront. And I think that also with this book, because there is such tension between Avery and their parents and with their brother as well for different and more nuanced reasons, but I think her friend group really just kind of gives her a soft place to land. And I think that that's really important, especially when writing for teenagers, for young adults, to be able to see like, okay, this is all going on, but there's still hope and joy and positive things happening.
Highly recommend the experience of reading these 4 books back to back. Because it is really fun to see like all the things that connect them, but like they're not like you're all 4 different individual human beings, and yet there are so many things that are woven throughout all of them that you have in common, and also they're very unique. So on that topic, all 4 of your stories, and none of them really center on like a pivotal moment of coming out. They're either out to just some friends or family, or it's just, you know, maybe they have to come out to their sister, you know, the secret boyfriend and everything. But there's not really a pivotal moment of like this build up towards coming out. And so I was wondering if that was like intentional, and if it was, why, and if it was not, why do you think it happened that way?
I think for me, definitely intentional. I was talking about this recently. So Becky Albertalli, who wrote the book that Love, Simon was based on, she's written a whole bunch of books since then. We did a virtual event when All I Know So Far came out, and we kind of touched on that for a long time there were queer trauma narratives, and that was kind of it, right? Like if we wanted to see ourselves on the page, on the screen, we had to watch a Kill Your Gays narrative or something happen to make it end very horribly. And out of that kind of became these coming out narratives where we got things like Love, Simon, where we got happy, joyous coming out where like maybe not everything was perfect, but they had like overall it was like a happy thing. And now I think that because of that, and because books like that have done that legwork, we can write more about, okay, we're out, so now what happens? And I think that for me, I really wanted Avery not to have the experience of like constantly coming out, but to be like, no, I'm queer, this is who I am, and like this is the things that are happening to me in my life because of that.
My first YA was very much a coming out narrative. My first one was about a bisexual cross-country runner whose secret girlfriend dies. I don't write happy books, y'all.
They're very good.
Thank you. They're very sad. So with this book, I knew that I did not want to write a coming out narrative. I wanted Sid's gender identity and their queerness to very much inform their experience, but I didn't want it to have anything to do with the plot at all. I don't think the word non-binary is even used within the book. I don't know if it's used in the cover copy either.
It was not ever in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, yay, wonderful. Just because I was like, this informs who they are, and also they have so much bigger things to worry about than figuring out how to come out within the scope of this narrative.
And I'll pause with you there. Out of all four of them, though, like your Sid is like the least visible in their queerness. Like you've talked about a little bit about how their gender identity kind of isolates them. So they're only out to, forgive me if I'm wrong, their father, who's in prison, so he doesn't really get to do much other than just be there. Their grandmother, and their new friend. So what was kind of like the choice between like, oh, do I have Sid come out to more people, or do I have them just stay with like just with those three people? Was there ever that kind of decision making?
Not consciously, but I think for Sid, they're out in so much in a way that feels very relatable to me as a neurodivergent person, as a queer person, where like they are not out in the traditional sense, but everyone in that town is looking at them and is like, they ain't right. Something ain't right about them. They are more explicitly out to their Graham, to Mavis, and again, somewhat to their father, but not really. So it wasn't really a conscious choice, but it was a thing where it was like, I don't think anyone would be
No one's surprised.
Yeah. if that was the choice that happened, but yeah, like I said, there are just other things that they're getting side-eyed for.
That's fair. They got a lot going on.
Yeah, I think similar to what Nita said, like in Blue Ridge Calling, Court and Sage have way bigger fish to fry. They're dealing with ghosts, they're dealing with a missing brother. They don't really have time to be contemplating their identities that much. But also, I mean, I think, everybody, I'm sure everybody here has a different experience of coming out. I came out when I was 12, 13. So when I was Cora's age, I was already out and it was already kind of like an accepted thing. And so, and so that felt natural to me to write her as a character who has been out for many years, and it's just like a fact of life at that point. And yeah, obviously not everybody gets to experience that, and for various reasons. But I think that felt intuitive to me, and I like that the queer romance in the book is one of the simplest parts of the book. And in this context of like people are dying, like there's ghost shit happening, like there's somebody's missing, like all of this stuff is going on, and beyond that people are having like family problems, and like they're all at this stage of their life where they're like trying to figure things out and figure out where they want to go and what they want to do and who they want to be. I think it's nice that the romance is like the simple, easy part of that whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my experience with coming out was really different, but I came to the same conclusion, which is really funny. Like I spent so many years of my life like agonizing over whether to come out, when to come out, how to come out, if to come out. And I think honestly, like by the time like people in my life just like figured it out, and by the time I like officially publicly came out, like I was kind of just sick of it. Like I was sick of thinking about it, I was sick of reading about it, I was sick of talking about it. Like it just wasn't interesting to me anymore. It was just like too close in my own experience, and I wanted to write about not about like this thing that I have spent so much time processing already. I wanted to instead like get into some of the nuances of the queer experience rather than just like this one pinnacle moment.
Yeah. Sorry, can I respond to that?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I think that similarly, I felt tired of reading stories about queer young people coming out, and like Nicole said, the tragedy of it, and that like there wasn't a lot of queer YA when I was growing up, and when I started the book, there wasn't, and so it, yeah, like having that romance be like pretty straightforward, I thought was that was just what I wanted to read.
I think there's so much value in both coming out stories, but also in just casually being queer. I think that the only queer character in the book that I knew when I was in high school was Nico D'Angelo.
And let's all give it up.
I don't ever think I actually read a book by a queer author when I was in high school. And as someone who didn't realize she was queer until 23, definitely it's just always nice to read books in YA where being queer is kind of just the most casual thing in the world. So thank you all. All right, we'll get into some individual questions. I'll start with Nicole. Sorry, you're just like in the most line of sight for me. All right, so all I know so far is told in journal entries. And so what was the inspiration to tell the story through the lens of a journal?
Yeah, I think that Avery's voice in particular was always very loud, and was always very just like who they were. And so I think that when I like sat down to start writing it, that was what made sense. And then I also think that it lends itself to kind of the events that happen in the book, which aren't anything, especially dramatic, or, like it's just about this 1 year in their life and the things that happen, some of which are like more emotionally intense than others. But I think that having that kind of journal format allowed Avery to kind of like dramatize certain things to themselves that like show up on the page. And I think that also was like important just in the craft of it.
Do you journal?
No.
That's fair. I also do not journal. My thought process is, if my brain already knows what to say, why should I write it down? I'd make a terrible author.
I think I'm too ADHD to journal, which is funny because when I like went through, I had written Avery, like they had gone out to editors, etc. I had a friend sit me down unrelated to this and be like, hey, you might have ADHD. And so when I circled back then to do edits, I was like, oh, I think Avery also has ADHD. So like that wasn't something that they had originally, but I was like, oh, I wrote this in there by accident.
Yeah, I think that happens all the time with neurodivergent authors and like neurodivergent readers, like reading somebody as like, oh, is this representation, or is it just like, do they have something in common?
Is it just
Yeah. On to the next. Your book has a lot of Appalachian folklore, as well as Cherokee folklore, believe I remember, or it just mentions Cherokee a lot. And so I was wondering, what made you choose like the folklore piece of your book?
Yeah. Well, also I wanted to say about, wait, what were you saying? ADHD.
Journal, yeah.
Classic. Yeah.
We're doing
no,
great.
I don't think I knew that I had ADHD when I was writing the book, but I still put it on the page that Sage has ADHD and is medicated, which is interesting now to reflect back on. But I think that it like informs a lot of my characters and my writing in general.
I think even when I knew, like I've known I've had OCD since I was a small child, and it wasn't until like going back and doing edits that I was also like, oh, like her brother has OCD, and that's a thing that I don't think he would be ready to hear, so it's not diagnosed. But I was like, no, I'm doing great.
In general, I think like I tend to, I trend towards not naming identities as much in my work, for various reasons. I think it's really a personal preference and about kind of what I like to read. And I think representation is important in both respects, like when it's labeled and when it's not labeled. I think that ideally we have, a wide variety to choose from. But that was one thing that I did put on the page because I felt that it really informed Sage's character and a lot of her behavior. And I thought it was like a fun added characteristic to a character that is supremely anxious and not having a good time like throughout the book. So yeah, anyway, to answer your question, yeah, I love Appalachian folklore. I think that it's such a unique place, and I think because the mountains are so isolated, the culture of Appalachia has really like had some time to sit and become distinct, I think, from even like surrounding Southern culture. And there's so much of a unique history that has lent itself to the development of that folklore. You know, the immigration of Irish and Scottish people to the mountains means that there's a lot of like Celtic paganism in the folklore. You know, there's Christian influences. There's, you know, obviously a huge presence of the Cherokee, and there's been so much like I think the thing that I found interesting was the idea that the mountains are haunted because they're so old. Like the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world. And also the idea that like so much violence has happened in the mountains. And like from the Trail of Tears to like the abuse of coal miners and like the death of coal miners and the kind of like violence of that industry, the destruction of the natural world in the mountains, you know, fracking, mountaintop mining, all of that. And then like just, yeah, like, and then all of the regular violence, that begets a lot of hauntings and ghosts. I think that's a really interesting idea. And that was kind of what started me on the path of kind of researching more about the real ghost stories of North Carolina and like how they kind of concentrate in certain areas and what the themes are of those stories, and like what types of tragedies become folklore. And I'm working on a second book. Well, I'm working on many books, but one of them is a sequel to Blue Ridge Calling, and so I think the second one will include a lot more about other types of Appalachian folklore outside of ghosts, like, you know, the kind of like magic system, I think, of like granny witches. And so I'm really excited to explore that.
That was very exciting. All right, Kelsey, your book is mostly set in like a virtual reality like paradise. So I was wondering if you could make your own virtual reality paradise, where would you have it be based off of?
I would not do that.
That's
I
very
definitely
fair.
would not. I tried to. One of like the inspirations for the book is that I went to have you ever been to like there's like virtual reality arcades where like basically you go in and it's just a bunch of different virtual reality games that you can play.
I didn't know this existed.
Oh, they exist. And
Oh
I
my
went there for inspiration for the book because I was thinking a lot about like, because in the book there are these two characters who remember their friendship breakup really differently, and part of the point of this like simulation is for one of the ex-best friends to try to force the narrator to remember it the way that she remembered it. So it's like memory. And for me, like the mechanism was this VR system. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to experience it. And so I went to one of those arcades and I paid for like 60 minutes in it. And I lasted 20 minutes before I had a panic attack and threw up in the bathroom because there's something just so like claustrophobic and dissociative and horrifying.
That's so weird because in the book it goes so well.
Yeah, right. It's so weird, right? Yeah. No, and I also think there's just like in the way that social media oftentimes like simulates connection with other humans, but actually like pushes us further apart. In a similar way, like virtual reality, in my opinion, like simulates connection with the environment, with the outside world. And so there's like, because there's all these games where it's like you're paragliding through like a beautiful mountainscape, or you're like watching a beautiful sunset over the city, or you're like, you know, they're trying to sort of simulate relationship with the world. And what it's actually doing is like just deepening this disconnection that we have with the world around us. And so I don't think I would do it. If I could like teleport somewhere, I would always want to be able to teleport back home to the mountains. But I also think like having some, just because I live in Brooklyn, which is really sad because I miss it every single day. But I also think it's kind of important that I can't teleport, or that I can't like go into a virtual reality of it, because part of the relationship is this act of constant return.
That's fair. Yeah. I think that. So no, go ahead.
I just thought that was really funny and like so apt, and it made me think of for the Percy Jackson heads, like the Lotus Hotel in the Percy Jackson series, where they get trapped in like it's like a hotel, but it also has like attractions, and they're getting like they can't.
Casino.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. It's a casino. I think and I think that in the show they made it like also have like virtual reality games and stuff. But yeah, there's something else I was gonna say. About like the disconnect of from reality, I think. I don't know. Come back to me.
So yeah, I already forgot what I was going to say too. So move on. But Renita, why a serial killer? And how do you like figure out how to make a serial killer?
What a question.
Okay, so I wrote this book in 2018. This was about the height of my true crime phase. I was listening a lot to the podcast My Favorite Murder. I don't listen to it anymore. I stopped during the pandemic because hearing people very flippantly talk about some of the most horrific crimes, I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. So that was partially why serial killer was because I wanted to write something that felt very true crime. And then because I at the time, not beating the allegations of being a white person with a fascination for serial killers, not anymore. But I wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore why do we have this cultural fascination with some of the most horrific things to ever happen to a person. And that's something that I also wanted to figure with Sid, and that came a lot later in revisions too, because Sid wants to try to atone for what their father has done. They want to try to reach out to like his victims' families, and their girlfriend and their best friend are both like, please don't do that. These people don't want to hear from you. They don't want a reminder that you exist at all, basically. The answer of how you craft a serial killer is you read a lot of research books. There was one, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts, so there was one called The Happy Face Killer, which I'm so sorry about. That podcast was actually good because it was told from the perspective of a woman whose father was a serial killer. So getting her perspective was very useful. I listened to a fair amount of kind of like FBI profiling of like what made certain serial killers tick. I looked at, this is not fun research, it's very gruesome research of looking at details of like specific serial killers and kind of figuring out why do they do this? What is the MO? But also I did not want the focus to be on Sid's dad, to be on the killer. So there are interstitials throughout the book of his victims. I very much wanted to keep the focus on his victims, on Sid, on the current girls going missing, so on the impact that this has on the actual community, because we know a bunch of the names, like just in pop culture, like you all could probably tell me who Ted Bundy is. Could you name 5 of Ted Bundy's victims? Because I can't. And I wanted to bring it more back around to that.
I think you definitely nailed it in the book of like focusing on the victims, and as someone who is not into true crime and also like has their qualms with true crime, I think you definitely did a really great job of showing how yes there can be a fascination and also like these are real people.
Yeah, it's a very exploitative genre.
Yeah.
I remembered what I was gonna say, which is that was in reference to your story about the VR arcade. That happened to my sister on the Shrek 4D ride at Universal Studios. She was like 5 or 6, but she had like a full meltdown and had to leave because the chair moves. I don't know if you guys have ever been in one of those old school like 4D rides where it's like a movie, but the chair moves and they like blow air at you and stuff. She was like really freaked out and had to leave. And my dad followed her out, and we went and met my dad outside, and we were like, oh, sorry, you had to like, leave because to go with her. And he was like, no, I did not like that. I did not want to be in there anymore. And that was like a really impactful memory for my sister. She like wrote a song about it.
What's the song name?
I think it's called like Fourth Dimension or something.
She got called Shrek or something.
Yeah, no, because yeah, she was. I think it's based on like the idea of a fourth dimension. It's very interesting. Yeah, sorry.
We are almost to our hour, so I was going to turn it over to the audience and see if anyone else has any questions for either the whole group or just a single person. If not, I do have more questions, but don't be afraid to ask your question.
Not everyone at once.
It can be silly.
Okay, if anyone thinks of one, just blurt it out. But I think that writing YA, we live in a time, but we live in a time where writing, I think YA is very unique because the genre of YA is meant for like 12 to 18, sometimes it's 14 to 18, but a lot of YA readers are going to be adults. And so what's it like to write a book that, like, you know, it's like, if this is for teens, like this is for young adults, and also I'm probably gonna have like a 40-year-old woman say that my main character is like really immature because they're 18. Like, how is it like balancing the fact that this is a YA book and also a lot of adults are gonna read it?
I don't think about the adults when I'm writing it. This is actually also why I don't write a lot of YA anymore, because I felt real during the period when I was writing a lot of YA, I felt really good about being able to tap into that voice, being able to tap into like that experience of being a teenager. And the older I get and the more removed I get from that, I don't feel like I personally can do it as authentically. So I wanted to keep that experience and those books as authentic and as meaningful as possible. So I straight up I don't think about the adults. I have a lot of feelings about the commodification of YA and the fact that adults have purchasing power, and that's who determines the market of YA, and the fact that people are starting to talk about YA books and the level of spice they have in them pisses me off. I'm not going to start that soapbox now.
That'll be a panel next month. I'll sit down with Nina, we'll talk about it, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I think, but ultimately for me, the thing is like, I don't think about the 40-year-olds because they're not my audience. My audience is teenagers. That will always remain true for me for YA, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like I would more accurately describe Blue Ridge Calling as new adult, because most of the characters they're like 17 to 20 is like the age range of the main characters, and new adult was not really like as big of a category when I started working on it, and still is like not as marketable, I think, of a category. And so yeah, I think that's how it landed in the YA category. But I think that I feel like my goal is for my characters to feel real to any age group, and I think that that's how you write authentic young people, because young people are just people and they really don't like to be talked down to and condescended to. And I think like I thought a little bit when I was writing it about like my characters say fuck, and you know, like there's no on-screen on the page sex, but they reference sex and they have had sex, and I think like to me that feels realistic. Like they drink, some of them drink and some of them smoke cigarettes, and like not all of them. And it's certainly a situation where like every teenager is different and they all have different experiences of being young. But I think that feels more accurate to me of my experience of teenagers and of being a teenager than to like sanitize that experience or to try and like limit what young people are seeing on the page. This is kind of an aside, but as my day job, I work for the ACLU, and some of our work is advocating against book bans. And so I think a lot about how, you know, we think and talk so much about like what young people can handle reading about. And I think I loved reading books for adults when I was a kid. I loved reading things that were complicated, and even if it was like an experience that I didn't have, like I enjoyed reading about it. And so yeah, I think that it feels really important to me to not hide things from young people in books.
Yeah, I think all of that, and I think I really agreed with what you said about just not really thinking about adult readers while I'm writing YA. I think that I know there will be adult readers, and there will be adult readers that because it's YA are able to like it really resonates with them, or they really see themselves, and that's great, and I love them. And then also for adults reading YA, like I do frequently see the like, I don't read my own Goodreads reviews because they're not my business, but like if I'm reading other reviews, I'll see like, oh, this character was super immature, and I think this happens even more often when a character is neurodivergent, and it happens even more often whenever there's really an intersection of identity there. Like BIPOC readers get it a lot more often than any of us will, and yeah, I think I just don't care about it.
As you should.
I feel very similarly. Like all of this, and also the other thing that is in my mind is just that like we're talking about young people versus adults, but really what we're talking about is power, and like who has the power to say what is appropriate for a group of people to read. And I'm instinctively suspicious of that. You know, like I do think that like there are boundaries that probably teenagers can discern for themselves and figure out if they're comfortable reading about something or not. But also like I was resonating so hard with what you were saying of like teenagers are people. Yeah. They're some of like the most intelligent and weird and hilarious people around. Yeah. And so it feels to me like I also don't really think about that distinction between adults and young adults that much when I'm writing, because ideally it's something that like teenagers will connect with, and that like because teenagers are intelligent humans, like other intelligent humans across age lines will also enjoy it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I think that my parents had a really lax approach to what I was allowed to consume. And I really appreciate the way that they handled those types of situations, because my mom loves YA. She reads a lot of YA. She reads a lot of everything. And like, you know, she won't turn down a book. Like if somebody recommends it to her, she'll read it. And like, I don't know, it's funny, like she told me once that she was really into Animorphs, and I just kind of assumed that she was into those books when she was a kid, but she was in her 40s when those books came out. Like I realized at some point that Animorphs came out in the 90s, and I was like, huh, that's cool. But so when I was a kid, my mom read everything that I read, and so that she could talk to me about it, and so that she knew what I was interested in. And with books where she was like concerned about the content, she might read it before me, and she might give me a heads up, but she was not going to tell me not to read it. And I think she had a good sense of what is actually disturbing to children, which I think is often not the things that we try to censor. Like when I was reading the Harry Potter series, she, like her main concern that she warned me about was like the deaths that happen that are really impactful, and she was like, it might make you really sad. And I think that's more insightful into what might be disturbing for a kid than like, there's like cursing in this. Like, I think that's kind of silly. I don't know, I have this very salient memory of watching Little Miss Sunshine when I was like 10 or 11. And there's so much that's inappropriate about that movie, which is, I love it, I think it's great. And the only part that my mom like paused and warned me about was when the kid like finds out that he can't be a pilot and starts like screaming. And she was like, he's about to scream, it might be scary. Like, and I think that, yeah, I appreciate that understanding of like what I might react to as a person instead of like what might be inappropriate for children. Sorry, I'm rambling.
One day we can have an unprofessional conversation and rant about YA and all of that, because I also have summary events. Well, that is going to conclude our time today. So thank you so much for everyone for being here today. I want to give a shout out to Flyleaf Books for hosting this event and for organizing and getting all of these authors up here. And I also want to give a thank you to everyone who's here. I think that queer voices in publishing, queer stories in our community are so very important, and especially when it comes to access to queer representation in media for young adults, that is essential and that is vital, and it can save lives. So thank you for being here today and for uplifting and supporting these authors and their stories. Your goal and your homework is, sorry, it is what it is. I have an education degree. But your homework today is to recommend one of these books to a teen that you might know, especially if they're queer, but even if they're not, because straight people can read queer stories too. But thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's creeping over in the back. I think we're going to do signings next.
Yeah, so we'll do signings at the table. And so if you haven't gotten a copy of the book or any of the books, they're all up front, either at the registers or at that table next to it.
I also would love, just before we finish, to again mention that this is a great panel and we talked about a lot of great stuff, and also we as white authors are not going to experience